Everyone imagined Smokey Yunick's garage as a sealed vault hiding outlaw engines and blueprints, so dangerous NASCAR wanted them forgotten. The reality turned out to be far more fascinating. After Smokey died from leukemia on May 9th, 2001, the doors to his famous Daytona Beach workshop finally opened, revealing a public sale filled with everything from $5 hand tools to experimental engines that had pushed far beyond conventional thinking. Mixed among the ordinary clutter were genuine innovations that Detroit had dismissed, racing officials had battled, and history had nearly overlooked. So what did the family and fans actually discover when the best damn garage in town was finally open for everyone to see? The doors opened. Weeks after the funeral, the nondescript building at 957 North Beach Street in Daytona Beach didn't host a private inventory by cloaked officials. It hosted a multi-day public garage sale that drew hundreds of fans. People came from as far away as Maine and Oregon, hoping to carry home a piece of racing history from the place Smokey Yunick had called the best damn garage in town. Smokey had died on May 9, 2001, at age 77 after a year-long battle with leukemia, passing away at his Daytona Beach home. By then, the famous garage had already been closed for years. He had opened it in 1947, building a reputation as one of the most inventive and controversial mechanics in American motorsports. Then, in 1987, he shut the doors, saying there simply weren't any good mechanics left. The building remained largely untouched until his family began sorting through everything the following year. What visitors discovered wasn't a hidden laboratory packed with mysterious machines that racing officials had tried to erase. It looked much more like a working craftsman's shop that had been frozen in time. During Speed Weeks in February 2002, widow Marge Yunick opened the contents to the public. $5 fender hammers sat beside $20 boxes filled with race car parts. There were stacks of hubcaps and exhaust pipes, a working 1950s GMC dealership sign, Smokey's well-used manual typewriter, and one hand-built engine advertised with a remarkable claim. It could deliver 80 miles per gallon. The asking price was $20,000. Marge summed up the sale with a line that perfectly captured both the clutter and the value inside the building. "We're like a junkyard, but a first-class junkyard," she said. She also explained what Smokey would have wanted. He wanted the tools and parts put back to work, or owned by fans who would treasure them as a piece of his magic, instead of leaving everything locked away behind museum glass. That philosophy mattered because Smokey had spent much of his life rescuing forgotten machines and restoring them to working condition. According to the family, he had little interest in seeing his life's work controlled by wealthy collectors or turned into an untouchable display. The proceeds from the sale were intended to support a foundation promoting motorsports innovation, extending the same spirit of experimentation that had defined his career. His daughter, Trish Yunick Brown, later remarked that while many people wanted the physical objects, she was keeping something far more valuable: his stories. Her husband, Chris Brown, described Smokey in a way racing fans instantly recognized, calling him NASCAR's wildest cheater. It wasn't meant as an insult. It reflected a man who constantly found legal gray areas that forced rule books to evolve. The contrast with the legends couldn't have been sharper. Instead of secret government seizures or midnight NASCAR raids, the great unveiling was a public sale where ordinary fans could buy ordinary tools alongside extraordinary inventions. Even after the property was sold in 2003, and the remaining building was eventually destroyed by fire on April 25, 2011, the real legacy had already been scattered into garages, workshops, and collections across the country. Would you have driven across the country for a $5 hammer that once belonged to Smokey, or held out for that claimed 80-mile-per-gallon engine? Among the hammers and hubcaps sat engines and parts that weren't ordinary leftovers. One promised 80 miles per gallon. Others were even more radical, prototypes that Detroit engineers had tested, verified, and ultimately walked away from. If the public sale proved the garage was never a sealed fortress of mystery, what machine survived that produced performance figures decades ahead of their time? The hot vapor engines that actually survived. Tucked among the sale items and retained by the family were the engines that proved Smokey had cracked something Detroit's best engineers walked past: the hot vapor cycle. While modern cars use computers to manage fuel, Smokey took a different approach with a modified 2.5-liter Pontiac Fiero Iron Duke four-cylinder. The stock version produced roughly 90 horsepower and got about 35 highway miles per gallon. Smokey's carbureted version pushed 250 horsepower and 250 pound-feet of torque, cutting the 0 to 60 time to about 6.5 seconds while achieving 51 miles per gallon on 93-octane gas. He did this through what is technically called adiabatic combustion. In plain language, instead of cooling the air and fuel mixture, he used waste heat from the exhaust and coolant to boil it. The mixture pushed through an exhaust-driven turbine called a homogenizer under the carburetor, routing through a wrapped manifold until it reached temperatures over 450 degrees Fahrenheit. This completely vaporized the fuel, allowing the engine to run an extremely lean air-to-fuel ratio of more than 20-to-1. Detroit labs and original equipment engineers actually verified these incredible performance numbers, confirming the engine met strict 1980s emissions standards entirely without a computer. The core idea originated in the 1950s with Ralph Johnson, a Holley carburetor expert and General Motors dyno technician who collaborated with Smokey. Together, they figured out how to push past the normal detonation threshold, running exhaust temperatures around 2,250 degrees to control the hydrogen burn. As Johnson later explained regarding their lean burn calibration, the car never ran as well as it did just before it let go. They built multiple hot vapor prototypes, including a 3-cylinder Buick, a Ford, and a Dodge Omni. Each of these test vehicles exceeded 45 miles per gallon and produced nearly 2 horsepower per cubic inch. There were near misses with production, including an S-10 truck project and a licensing deal with Crane Cams. Ultimately, the technology collapsed under concerns over durability, lawyer fees, high manufacturing costs, and the industry's not-invented-here syndrome. But the physical engine survived. His daughter, Trish, retained 4 of them. Enthusiast Tony Allers eventually acquired the running examples and built a beautifully restored, daily-driven Fiero replica from the salvaged original drivetrain, driving it for years. On Christmas in 2009, Allers donated that vehicle to the Don Garlits Museum of Drag Racing, where it sits on display, while another unit is reportedly at the Smithsonian. If a carbureted 2.5-liter 4-cylinder could hit 250 horsepower and 51 miles per gallon in the 1980s while meeting emissions, why did Detroit let the not-invented-here syndrome kill it? The hot vapor engines were the crown jewels that outlived them in physical form. But Smokey hadn't stopped at one breakthrough. He filed patents spanning fuel conditioning, oil systems, engine testing, and even a crash barrier, documenting ideas the racing world often rejected until years later. If the prototypes showed what he built in secret, the patent list revealed how systematically he tried to force the industry forward. What exactly did those patents cover, and which ones did Detroit seem to take interest in the most? The patents and the ideas they tried to bury. While the hot vapor secrets partly went to the grave, the patent office held a paper trail of everything Smokey refused to let die quietly. Patents are essentially legal proof of when an idea was born, and the United States Patent and Trademark Office records confirm he secured at least 9 of them between 1978 and 1996. They show a man actively trying to solve problems long before the establishment was ready to accept his answers. His hot vapor engine research produced a cluster of these documents, proving his garage tests were backed by serious engineering schematics. Between 1984 and 1988, he secured multiple patents. These covered the exact apparatus, operating methods, and fuel conditioning systems for internal combustion engines that powered the Fiero. These patents entered the public domain around 2003, released so the technology could be studied freely. He also registered patent 4,068,635 for a pressure vent in 1978, patent 5,246,086 for an oil change system in 1991, and patent 5,515,712 for engine testing methods in 1994. But his most frustrating battles with sanctioning bodies revolved around safety and aerodynamics. In 1961, he developed pneumatic air jacks to lift stock cars instantly during pit stops, but NASCAR rejected them as inappropriate for the series. The following year, he mounted a massive wing over the engine of Jim Rathman's Simonis Vista Special Watson Roadster for the Indy 500. It generated unprecedented downforce and brilliant cornering speed, but it created too much drag on the straightaways, and the United States Auto Club quickly banned it anyway. Decades later, wings became standard mandatory equipment in Can-Am, Formula One, and Indy car racing. The darkest delay involved safety barriers. In the early 1980s, long before the modern safer barrier existed, Smokey designed a primitive soft-wall concept using old tires sandwiched between heavy sheets of plywood to absorb impacts. NASCAR did not adopt it at the time, leaving drivers with solid concrete walls. He eventually formalized his safety research into Patent 5,645,368 in 1996, specifically detailing a racetrack with a novel crash barrier. How many lives might have been saved if NASCAR had adopted Smokey's tire wall barrier concept in the early 1980s, instead of waiting decades for safer barriers? Patents and rejected safety gear showed the pattern. Smokey solved problems the rulebook and the establishment weren't ready for. Nowhere was that clearer than in the cars that forced NASCAR to invent templates. The legendary 7/8 scale Chevelle was not a shrunken toy. It was something subtler and more effective that still rewrote the inspection book. But what did the measurements in Smokey's own writings actually reveal about those Chevelles? The Chevelle that forced the templates. The photo that still circulates of Smokey beside his Chevelle with the crooked grin and cigar is usually captioned as the 7/8 scale car that made NASCAR rewrite the rules. Except the scale model part is the one myth the measurements destroy. A literal 7/8 scale car would have been nearly 10 inches narrower, more than 2 feet shorter, and sitting on a 100-inch wheelbase. It would have been blatantly obvious to anyone walking past it in the garage. Instead, the truth involved three 1966 bodied Chevelles, which are often mistakenly called 1967 models. The foundation included serious developmental work by Chevrolet Engineering, followed by Smokey's meticulous finishing. The real modifications were brilliant aero shifts. He moved the body approximately 2 inches backward on the chassis to improve weight distribution. He smoothed and raised the floor pan to manage airflow underneath, subtly lowered the roof and windows, raked the windshield back, and altered the fenders and drip rails. He even sectioned the front bumper, making it taller to act as an aerodynamic spoiler. The sheet metal remained largely stock, but the geometry was sculpted to cut the air. At speeds over 180 miles per hour, those tiny aerodynamic shifts make a massive difference. When NASCAR inspectors realized something was off, they tried to create their first templates using a wrecked Chevelle driven by Bobby Johns as a pattern. This caused immense problems during inspection and ultimately forced NASCAR to mandate standardized roof, hood, and trunk templates to the entire field. The engineering worked perfectly. Driving one of these versions, Curtis Turner became the first person to qualify at over 180 miles per hour at Daytona. Smokey himself explicitly denied the pure scale model rumor in a 1987 Circle Track magazine article and later in his autobiography, explaining that his alterations were far more calculated. This fit his larger pattern of living in the gray areas of the rulebook. He famously exploited fuel capacity limits by using 11-foot coils of 2-inch tubing for his fuel line, which added roughly 5 extra gallons to the car's total fuel volume. There are endless legends of cars with offset chassis and empty tank drive-offs following inspections. As Smokey later wrote about his tactics, he believed all those other guys were cheating 10 times worse than us. So it was just self-defense. The Chevelles and the gray area tactics were public proof of private garage thinking. But the most personal thing left behind wasn't a car or a patent. It was Smokey's own voice in over 1,000 pages. The family published the autobiography he finished as time ran out, revealing a man who felt triumphant and exiled. What did those pages reveal about the Fireball Roberts tragedy that drove him out of NASCAR? The autobiography, while fans hauled away hammers and the prototypes went to new homes or museums, Smokey left the most complete record of his mind in the book he finished as leukemia closed in. Those 1,100 pages are something no competitor video treats as the real journal found in the garage. Titled Best Damn Garage in Town, it was released as a massive 3-volume box set. Self-published posthumously around 2001 through Carbon Press and his family. The set included over 400 photographs and was divided into volumes covering his life, stock car racing, and his Indy 500 entries and inventions. John DeLorean even narrated the audiobook. This serves as the authentic raw voice that entirely replaces the fictional unsent letters often invented by modern storytellers. The pages detail the profound tragedy that drove him from stock car racing. In 1964, his close friend Fireball Roberts crashed and burned at Charlotte, dying 40 days later from his injuries. The loss pushed Smokey into an aggressive safety campaign. When his proposals for safer fuel cells were repeatedly overruled by NASCAR founder Bill France Sr., Smokey officially left the organization around 1970. The autobiography also tackles his military service, highlighting a fascinating conflict between memory and official records. Smokey claimed he flew over 50 missions in a B-17 bomber, but National Archives records show he was drafted in 1943 as a welder and saw active duty from 1944 to 1946. However, the military did verify that he achieved the rank of second lieutenant and earned an Air Medal while serving with the 15th Air Force, proving his documented service was still highly decorated. His verified racing record was equally undeniable. He secured 57 Cup Series wins, claimed 2 championships as an owner and crew chief, and earned a 1960 Indy 500 victory as a master mechanic. He was also the first owner to win 2 Daytona 500s in 1961 and 1962. Ultimately, he was inducted into more than 30 Halls of Fame, including the inaugural class of the International Motorsports Hall of Fame in 1990 and the Motorsport Hall of Fame America in 2000. If Fireball Roberts' death in 1964 pushed Smokey into a safety crusade that NASCAR's owner repeatedly blocked, does that change how you read every later outlaw story about him? The book, the patents, the surviving engines, and the public sale together form the real inventory. But the final chapter of the garage itself is bittersweet. The property was sold in 2003 per the estate plan. Most buildings were carefully taken down, and the last remaining structure was destroyed by fire on April 25, 2011. What endures is not the physical building, but the foundation funded by the sale, the surviving machines, and the undeniable proof that one stubborn mind kept the sport honest by constantly outthinking it. How should the racing world actually remember the man whose leftovers still outperform the legends? Foundation, machines, and the rules he rewrote. When the last building on the old garage property burned on April 25, 2011, the physical best damn garage in town was gone, but everything that mattered had already escaped. Following Smokey's specific wishes, the contents of his famous shop were sold or auctioned off during a massive public event in 2002. The proceeds went to fund a foundation dedicated to supporting innovations in motorsports. He deliberately chose this path because he did not want his family burdened with maintaining an expensive archive, nor did he want his legacy controlled by high rollers funding a private museum. The property itself was sold in 2003, and most of the original buildings were eventually razed before the final fire destroyed the last remaining structure around 7 p.m. that April evening. But the most important pieces of his life's work survived out in the world. Tony Allers' running Hot Vapor Fiero still sits in the Don Garlits Museum of Drag Racing. It was donated by Allers on Christmas in 2009, which is fitting since Smokey once cited Garlits' early museum struggles as a reason to avoid building his own. His family still stores 4 prototype engines. A collector holds a Hot Vapor Dodge Horizon, complete with signed bill of sale, while Allers retains original garage tools and even a shop door. Another prototype engine is reportedly on long-term loan to the Smithsonian Institution. His presence remains heavily documented in over 30 different motorsports halls of fame. Hats, pipes, and original garage equipment sit securely in display cases across the country. But his most permanent monuments are the rules he forced the sport to rewrite. Every standardized body template in modern NASCAR traces its roots back to that slightly shifted Chevelle. Aerodynamic wings and pneumatic air jacks, which he debuted decades before they were popular, are now mandatory standards in other major racing series. Even his rudimentary tire wall safety concept laid the intellectual groundwork for the modern safer barriers saving drivers' lives today. And his hot vapor patents, now resting in the public domain, continue to be studied by engineers trying to maximize thermal efficiency. The real inventory they found after his death is infinitely more impressive than a fictional vault drama created for online clicks. Knowing the Hot Vapor Fiero still sits on display, making its original numbers, and the patents are in the public domain, What piece of Smokey's unfinished business do you most wish the industry had finished? The garage is gone. The myths keep growing. But the evidence that walked out in 2002, including the sale receipts, the running prototypes, the patent numbers, the 1,100-page book, and the rule book pages he forced to be rewritten, leaves no doubt who Smokey Yunick really was. What they found in Smokey Yunick's garage after his death left everyone speechless. Not because of Hollywood secrets, but because of 250 horsepower, 51 miles per gallon hot vapor engines.